Production funding is provided by A. Reddix & Associates, Health Information Resource Center, offering short-term training for long-term professional careers in medical coding. HIRCVA.net.
Discussing the issues and celebrating the successes of the African American community. This is Another View.
Hello everyone, I'm Barbara Ham Lee. Welcome to Another View. Every 4th of July for more than 30 years, the McNair-McLeod-Gibson family has gotten together for our family reunion. Now this is my mother's side of the family, and it is there that I've learned so much about our history, who got married, what diseases run in our family, how the family came to live in the rural communities surrounding Fayetteville, North Carolina. So how much do you know about your family history, and how did you learn? Through oral history, or have you done a family tree using research, census records, or even DNA? Here to talk to us about genealogy and tracing our family roots are Nathan M. Richardson, poet, author, and literary consultant, and genealogist Drusilla Pair. Welcome to Another View. Thank you all for joining me this evening. So I can't wait to hear your family stories, because I know, Drusilla, you've been tracing your family since 1996?
1994.
1994. And what have you discovered?
A whole host of things. I've traced my father's family back to the late 1700s. I discovered that all of my ancestors were not enslaved, that some of them were free prior to the Civil War. And I've traced my mother's side to 1800.
How did you get interested?
I think a part of it was being around my grandmother most of my life, and her stories about her life, about her family. She came to Newport News in 1943, and all over my life she's told stories about her life, about her ancestors, just about different people. Another event was with my grandfather's death, my paternal grandfather's death, and I connected with that family, my father's family. And when he died. And also in 1989, I attended a family reunion, and there I discovered distant relatives, the Bullock family of Warren County, North Carolina. And so in my early 30s, just a need to know about my family, and so I decided to start in November 1994.
Nathan, why is it seems like today there's so much more talk about tracing our family roots and so forth, but why is this need there for so many people to go back, to look back?
Well, you know, we were just talking about this before we came on the air, that with all the technology that seems to make us more connected these days, it's actually a little bit putting us further apart. We were talking about the fact that, you know, we used to write letters to each other, and you could keep those letters, and somebody could open a trunk, you know, 20 years down the road and read letters from mother to father and so forth. And so we don't have that in these days. So we're really trying to trace our heritage and find out who our mothers, fathers, and what type of relationships they had and what they did, and grandfathers and grandmothers and so forth. Now,
there are two distinct, well, I shouldn't say two distinct ways, but one way through the arts, through the art of the spoken word, is one way to trace your family roots. And then another way is the more scientific way, I guess. So I'm going to kind of split you guys up a little bit in terms of, let's talk about how you can actually trace your family roots. And Nathan, I know that you're immersed in the spoken word and in that form of storytelling and of passing down information. So if you go to your family reunion and someone starts telling a story, what do you do with that information? How do you handle that?
Well, you know, the griot of the family is the most important person in the family as far as the genealogy and the history. And there's an African saying that goes, if the griot dies, the library burns down. So you don't want to, you know, let the griot die without visiting the library a few times and listen to some of the things that that person has to say about who was related to who, and all the things about the family history. We just had a family reunion a couple of weeks ago, the Richardson and Hikes, and that was part of the reunion, to let people come up and tell orally about their history, their side of the family. So it's an important part.
Now, is it important for the people who are listening then to sit there and take notes, or to just kind of absorb it so that they become the next generation griot?
Absolutely.
How does that work?
To take notes, all of that. For those people who are more interested in actually tracing the genealogy, to take notes. But it's good just for the young people, the children, to hear that tradition, because that sticks in the soul. And that's how, that's how I became a poet, in that tradition of listening to my family, my father, talk about our family history and so forth.
Is there a story you can share with us? Something that you heard at the reunion?
Well, actually, one of the things that and I always tell this when I'm out about talking, that my father, two brothers, two sisters, and I used to call them Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, because they all had the same story, but everybody had a different version, and everybody's version was the gospel. So, I heard stories over and over again, and those things became ingrained in me as far as being able to relate those to the next generation.
Mm-hmm. But Drusilla, I saw you shaking your head when he said everybody has a story, but there's a little different twist to each of the stories. How do you determine what's real, or does it matter?
Well, it doesn't matter. I've just write it all down as a story, because you get different points of views. For example, with my grandmother, my maternal grandmother, talking about her maternal grandmother, Lavenia, has fond memories of Lavenia. She was a religious woman, and she is remembered by everyone for the way she walked into the church. She was part of the Holiness Church, and she didn't just walk into the church. She walked into the church praising God, dancing, and speaking in tongues and all of that. Well, I've interviewed various people, including my grandmother and people who were children or young adults during this time, maybe the 1930s or so forth. They're remembering this. Some of them remember her outside the church. Others remember her when she got to the church door, how she would stomp when she get there. So I put that into a story together. So it doesn't matter what all of them remember, but I've put that together. It gives me a greater point of view.
Mm-hmm. So when you're writing these things down or listening to these stories, can you kind of tell from the next generation who might become the next griot?
Yes, you can. I actually was talking to a young lady today, and she was talking about how her son, at 5 years old, has this ability to just stand up and orate and talk about things, talk about family. And so there is kind of this inherited gene that passes through from one generation to the next, just like you may inherit music or athleticism or whatever, that some young man or some young lady in the family is going to pick up on and carry that tradition on. Of the oral history.
I have a friend who lives in Maryland who had an uncle who had gotten older, much older in age, and she decided that it was really critical for her to go and actually videotape him. Right. And telling his stories before he passed. And she actually got there just before he passed away. And so she was really grateful to have that. But do you encourage people to do that also, besides just kind of retaining the information in your head, but actually videotaping?
Definitely video or audio tape, because you, as the person who's collecting all this information, you may forget some of the things that were said. You also, when that person passes on, you have that recorded voice of them telling their own story. So definitely to record in some type of way, as well as to write it down and to share it with others, not just to keep it for the person who's recording, to share it with your family.
Definitely you'd want to record that. We have the video cameras here and ready to record that type of thing. And it's important for generations, because you never know when somebody's going to pass on. And so if you have recorded that type of thing, you can, I've got tapes now that I'm putting away, and hopefully, my children, my grandchildren will pull those out and say, wow, this is
How do you preserve them so that you make sure that they stay?
Well, you'd want to put those in a place where, it's going to be away from the elements, natural disasters or whatever. But the CD keeps much longer than, say, tapes,
Okay, so no more tapes.
Right.
Make sure you record on the CD.
You want to go to the next generation of technology. If you've got things on tape now, you may want to take some of it and move it over from VHS to DVD or whatever. Yeah.
And that's important.
Yeah.
Okay, so we move on to the technological way to kind of trace our family history. There are a lot of websites that are out there, like Ancestry.com is one that comes to mind. But is that the route you took in terms of tracing your
No,
your
when I began in 1994, the resources online were limited. I did those found things through visiting courthouses, libraries, microfilm, lifting heavy books in the courthouse the hard way.
Wow.
The online has made it a little bit easier in some regards, but not everything is online.
So how did you get started? Give us a kind of a step-by-step process.
Well, as I mentioned, with my grandfather's death in 1987, and so I saved the obituary. With that 1989 family reunion, there was a one-page family history that was printed out, that was given out at the family reunion. And this was my first introduction to the Bullock family. And so I saved that. And that particular document traced our ancestry back to our slave ancestor, Ottaway Bullock. And so my question at the table, because I didn't know this family, how am I connected to this family? And so on the back of that one-page family history, I wrote down how I was connected to that family, that particular family. And so in 1994, when I began, I pulled all these things out that I had collected, things that are from my maternal grandmother, and I just began a family tree. I didn't know how to do it. I kind of learned as I went along.
So how do you do it? What can you tell us some tips or things that people need to think about as they start that process?
Well, you begin with yourself first. With you may do a formalized family tree, what's called a ancestral chart or pedigree chart of listing yourself, your parents, and how you're connected, your parents, your grandparents, and as far as you know. You might contact older family members to see who they remember, if they remember their grandparents. If you are the elder of the family, then you write what you remember. Perhaps you have peers. If you're the elder of the family, you have siblings and cousins who may remember things that you don't remember. So you start that way. And you begin writing those things down. You also should begin searching your home documents, obituaries, and that includes those documents that family members might have saved, obituaries and birth certificates and other vital records. And from there, after you begin to collect all these and then to document the different family groups, then you might go outside of your home as far as a library. You might search online through Ancestry. You can search the census. The latest census that is out is 1930, and so if you should probably have an
1930. That's the latest one that's online. Is
that
what you
no,
mean?
That's the latest one that is available because of, I guess, the Information Act.
I see.
So the next one, 1940, will be out in 2012, April 2012.
Okay.
So through the census, you can find additional information. Perhaps you may have elders in your family who are listed on the census, such as my grandparents are listed on the census, and then you can trace back.
Like Family Bible and
right,
other documents like that.
Yeah,
that
those type of documents you would include in whatever you can find, and those might be things in your home or the home of your living family members.
So now, there's one thing in terms of looking back and tracing the family history, but what should you also be doing to preserve what's happening with your family today so that the future generation will have these same types of records, especially since things are so electronic now, as you were saying in the beginning. We're not writing letters anymore and that kind of thing. So what should we be thinking about doing so that we can preserve it for the next generation coming?
Well, certainly, even in this generation, what I'm finding, for instance, when I attend a funeral, and she mentioned the obituary, is that the obituary is definitely something that people really want to capture and hold on to. It's still something that people really, really cherish. And when there's not enough to go around for the family who is there, then sometimes people can get kind of upset because they want to take these, and storm away and keep them as a record of the family and who was there. And so it's very important.
Okay.
I would encourage people to write their personal histories as well as their family histories, and put those in paper as well as other forms to leave to their families.
Drusilla, where do you keep all of this? You have an office like plastic?
No, I keep them at home. I have a whole lot of stuff. I've done some writing for my family reunions. I've started out with like a newsletter type thing at the family reunion, double-sided, just summarizing what I had found, and then from there I began to write books for my family reunion. So various family branches have books documenting what my research was at that point.
So now, are you the only historian in the family, or have you gotten an interest
well,
from others?
I have some distant cousins who do various aspects. Some of them are only interested in doing a family tree, and that's fine, and so they help me with that part of it. I do have a cousin in Atlanta who's related to me on my grandmother's side, and she's possibly related to me on 2 different branches. We're trying to figure out that other branch, but she's a researcher. And so we help each other. But other than that, I don't know anybody else.
One thing that some people, I have an uncle who says sometimes when we're talking about tracing our family roots, and he says, you know, sometimes y'all need to leave those roots buried.
Well, there are some interesting
Right.
stories, definitely.
Exactly. But how do you deal with it if you come across something within your family history that may not be as very pleasant or may be difficult to deal with?
Well, I think it's important for a lot of reasons. And one of the main ones is making sure that the younger people in your family know what their health line is. And so if you are holding out or whitewashing part of your history, then you might be erasing part of something that could do you good if you became ill or whatever. Certainly, you know, even in the oral tradition, there are stories about who married who and who did this that, you know, would be taboo to some extent. But I think it's important to remember and important to know.
And also to put it in context.
And to put it in context, I mean, there's a story about one of my uncles who was very light-skinned on the Richardson side and was married a very brown-skinned woman, and went down to North Carolina on their honeymoon and got arrested for being, you know, a white woman, a white man marrying a black woman.
Because he was very light.
Before he's very light. And so family from Virginia had to go down to North Carolina and bail them out and prove the ethnicity and all that kind of thing. So these are things that actually, if in context, they can actually enlighten, you know, the next generations.
A couple weeks ago, we did a show on sickle cell disease, and one of the things that they brought up was that when people find out they have the sickle cell trait, that families tend, because they're so happy it's just a trait, that they don't share that information, which is why it's so important to find out the history behind the medical side of families also, because if you don't know, then that can become problematic moving forward.
Right.
What other types of information can be gleaned from doing your family history that you think is really important for people to think about?
Just a lot of information. Talents. I've written things about musical talent, like on various family members, because that has been, some of my nephews are very, very talented musically. We mentioned health. Church history is a big part of my family history. And so I've been able to get a lot of information through churches, through contacting the churches where my ancestors were part of. On 3 occasions, I wrote letters to pastors where my ancestors were part of and explaining who I was. And I wanted to see if there were any family members still in that church. And all 3 times I got responses and contacted other family members.
Because so many of our families start from a slave history, is it more difficult for African Americans to trace back past that slavery part, I guess, to go further back, or not?
I actually have sit in on one of Ms. Pair's workshops, and what I found was that when you have all the documents and you've done the genealogy and everything, there's still the oral part that ties all of that together. And so if you come up with missing pieces, then you can go to the griot or somebody who remembers that, or you may even have something recorded that you can go to and say, okay, well this piece goes here, and then you come up with a complete puzzle.
With the complete part. Now you two are going to be doing workshops coming up at the Suffolk Festival, and I believe we have a full screen board on that, and it is September the 11th?
Right.
Is that correct?
Right.
Okay,
Taste
Finding
of
Your
Suffolk
Roots.
Downtown Street Festival.
Okay, and it's from 10 to 5, and you're doing 2 different sets of workshops?
Right, we're doing two sessions. The morning session is from 10 until 1. And it'll be my workshop first, and then Ms. Pair's, and then we'll have lunch, of course, and then a repeat session. So if you're getting up late and having a late morning, you can come out at 2 and get the second session from 2 until 5.
And then you both have more hands-on kind of instruction on how to trace your roots.
Definitely. And going into some of the background about, especially from the oral perspective of the African American heritage of storytelling and Sankofa, which means to go back and get it. And talking about how we have this tradition of going back and getting history and framing our future on what happened in the past.
Thank you both so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it. And we hope that people will come out and learn how to trace their roots. That's fantastic.
Thank you.
And when we come back, Norfolk's newest honorary deputy sheriff who brings a century of wisdom to the job. But first, here's what's happening in Hampton Roads. Welcome back. Hold on to your seat because the woman you're about to meet will amaze you. She's a great-great-grandmother who isn't about to spend her golden years just sitting around. Josephine McBride recently completed Norfolk's Citizens Police Academy, where she not only fired a machine gun, but hit her target. And the best part, she's 101 years young. Our Lisa Godley recently got a chance to talk with Mrs. McBride when her contributions to crime prevention netted her the title of Honorary Deputy.
Josephine McBride has seen quite a lot in her 101 years. In fact, the year she was born, the nation observed its very first Mother's Day. You could buy a new car for $800, and thousands flocked into Times Square to welcome in the new year and watch the ball drop for the very first time.
I know who brought me this far, and I know from whence I came. And my journey has been ups and downs. It hasn't been always pleasant, but my end has been beautiful.
Born and educated in South Carolina, Josephine McBride came to Norfolk in 1937 to work as a registered nurse at Norfolk Community Hospital. She says she married late, in her mid-30s, to Elbert McBride, and their union produced a set of twins. Throughout her life, this longtime member and past president of the Lindenwood Cottage Heights Barad Park Civic League has worked diligently to make her community a better place.
But I am watching around my home each night from 12 to 1 o'clock, trying to see that nobody bothers our community. That's my job every night.
So when the opportunity to join Norfolk's Citizens Police Academy arose, she jumped right on it. The officers who taught her class say they were a little concerned at first when they learned Mrs. McBride was more than a century old. But they soon learned that to Josephine McBride, age is just a number, and she did not disappoint, even on the firing range.
I was trying to shoot, but my finger wouldn't pull the trigger but one time. So I said, bam! And I said, he said, oh, you got him one time. So that's where I hit my target. And they told me, they said, well, it doesn't take but one to flow him down. So you got him. So that was it.
Ms. McBride is the oldest person to ever complete the Citizens Police Academy. During her time there, she studied everything from gangs to drugs and even took a tour of the Norfolk jail. It wasn't the 6 or 7 flights of stairs she climbed while there that bothered her, but what she saw when she reached the top.
I watched those young fellows in there that had, for some reason, had a little crime on their shoulders, and they were in jail. And those are the things that made me sad, because to think that our community and our boys and our elderly people too have made crimes for our community.
Of the 48 people who started in the academy, only half, including Josephine McBride, graduated, and the accolades just keep coming.
Josephine, this is a certificate. You are officially an honorary deputy with the Norfolk Sheriff's Office for all of your contributions to our community and for crime prevention. Awarded August 17, 2010 to Miss Josephine McBride.
Surrounded by 5 generations of her family, she graciously accepted.
Norfolk has been very good to me, and I have enjoyed living here.
When asked about the secret to her longevity, Josephine McBride would only say this.
It's been God that has brought me this far. No secret at all. I've just tried to honor people, love people, respect people, and be nice to everybody.
For Another View, I'm Lisa Godley.
She is something else. By the way, Mrs. McBride turns 102 next Friday. So on behalf of all of us here at Another View, happy, happy birthday. And that's our show for this evening. Please visit our website, anotherview.tv, and sign up for our eView newsletter. And if you're on Facebook, become a fan. Next week, the joys and challenges of foster parenting. We'll see you next time for Another View.
Production funding is provided by A. Reddickson Associates, Health Information Resource Center, offering short-term training for long-term professional careers in medical coding. HIRCVA.net.